Solutions architect and friend Viraj joins us today to talk GenAI, tech stacks, implementations, and more. But first, welcome to the Architecting Intelligence Podcast, a show for down-to-earth technical conversations about how engineering teams deploy and scale GenAI applications at work and in their personal lives. Today, I'm joined by a friend of mine, a very worthy inaugural first guest, Viraj. He's a senior solutions architect at AWS. Welcome to the very first show, Viraj.
Thanks a lot, Trevor. I'm super excited. I think with that introduction gets me a lot of responsibility. Great power comes with great responsibility. Great introductions come also with great responsibility to deliver value to our listeners and watchers.
That's all but guaranteed. I'll tell you what, listeners and audience, you will definitely learn a lot about GenAI today. And even if you don't, even if you're so smart that you already know all the stuff that we talk about, you're at least going to have fun because Viraj is a fun guy to hang out with and talk to. Viraj, let's start with this. Just fill folks in. Tell the audience, what are some various use cases that you've worked on with customers, maybe some of the projects you've been involved in, sort of some of the problems you've been asked to help solve with generative AI?
Yeah, so as you can all think about this, right? Like generative AI is one of the hottest, I would say, topics right now. If you're doing anything with technology, if you have not heard about it, most likely you should fix it.
Yeah,
And I don't think
you're
not.
wait,
I think you should absolutely be working or learning or experimenting with it at this point in time. I've worked with a lot of customers. So I actually work with a lot of customers in the financial services domain. So I've worked with a lot of customers who are trying to improve their user onboarding experience to their platform or to their service with generative AI based chatbots. I've worked with a lot of customers who are trying to build reports, summarization kind of use cases with generative AI chatbots or generative AI RAG based RAG. Let me back off a little bit. Retrieval like augmented generation based use cases. What I basically am seeing right now, at least as trends with my customers, is a lot of customers are trying to figure out what is the best use of this powerful technology that we have, and uh, are we going to use that towards developer productivity? Are we going to use that for reducing time to market? Are we going to use that to improve customers onboarding experience? Are we going to use that to maybe help our call center agents answer questions faster when our customers call them, etc.? So lot of interesting use cases in general is what I'm seeing right now for my customers. What
yeah,
about you, Trevor? I know you work a lot with generative AI also. What are you thinking of?
yeah. I
Or
mean,
what have you seen?
it's interesting. Lately, I'm starting to think a lot about the like I'm an engineer and I'm an architect by trade, and so I thankfully have gotten to work with Gen AI and have a good sense of what it can do well and maybe the weak areas of it. And so the thing that I'm actually most interested in when I talk to customers are the use cases that I couldn't know about because I am not an expert in their space, right? So like for me, contact center automation, I get that makes sense. Developer productivity, I work in an IDE. I've used inline code suggestion tools, so I get how that's useful. But I'm delighted whenever I'm talking to a customer in like a very technical field or a field that I'm not familiar with. Like recently, I talked to a marketing team, and getting to hear like by the way, marketing is like an obvious slam dunk a team to use
Absolutely.
generative AI in, of like whether it's ad creation, blog writing, even just validation of like, is a blog compliant with our policy? Like think about how many blogs you've had to proofread for somebody to make sure it's compliant with whatever. All of these are interesting things that we operate. So I guess I see similar trends to you though. I'm a big believer that like developer productivity is probably one of the quickest wins with this technology today, but it's still early days in a lot of ways. I think there are probably more killer use cases that we just can't even like think about yet because we haven't heard of them.
Yeah. Let me actually give you a killer use case, or I would say like
Okay.
this was a use case I was like, I had a eureka moment. I'm like, whoa, this is amazing. I didn't even think about this. So I was working with a customer, and it's typical. You said like call center. Helping your call center agents like answer a customer is a very obvious use case. Everyone can think about it. Marketing use cases, everyone can think about it. Content generation. We've seen so many generative AI products out there or services out there which allow you to do, script writing or generate a video now, generate images, etc. The one I actually came across, which was amazing, is an executive of a big company basically told me that they are essentially trying to use generative AI, make sure a LLM model learns from the interactions, like the chat transcripts of their previous customers or the customers that they have spoken to them, and then essentially use the Gen AI model to mock or behave as a customer which is angry, and see if how their agents are going to react to or manage that conversation as a part of training, or de-escalation training. So imagine you give conversations to a Gen AI model of how are some examples of conversations that that happen when a customer is angry, and then you write a prompt in a way that you essentially lead or let the chatbot essentially emulate an angry customer, and
Yeah.
then now you're using human agents and training them how to de-escalate. That was like boom, like I couldn't have even thought about that.
Yeah. No, that's like, because I feel like I hear a lot about like AI, like chat assistants, but like really, like this is almost the idea of like an AI coach, in
Basically,
any role, and it's such a cool. I haven't really heard of that specific use of it either, but it's such a cool one because now I can start to extrapolate, like, oh, I would use something like that to help coach me on my presentation or like my
yeah,
demo
absolutely.
or whatever, right? And it's such a yeah, like I feel like right now it's all in this, or there's been so much focus on plugging things into like just a chat interface. But when we can start having like a real time conversation with an angry customer, it's like that's just like a next level of training and also, by the way, an incredible example of AI making humans better, right?
Yeah, I would say that too, and it's definitely expanded the bounds of our imagination, right? Like we used to always think about like, chatbots are gonna help us like do like workflow automation. They're gonna help us do like things which we are bored of doing. The most obvious use cases around code generation were around, hey, can generative AI allow us to write like, help us writing like test cases,
Yeah,
etc. But now we are talking about like generative AI for training humans, or
yeah.
having humans improve their performance. This could be like what I just mentioned, or this could be, let's just say we transcribe everything that we are talking right now, give it to a LLM model and say, hey, I phrased something in a particular way, or this was my pitch. How can I make it more succinct, right? How can I make it better? How can I make it much more appealing to to
Yeah.
the to the listener, etc.
And maybe even like I've heard of tools that can do this in like real time too. These are like old school, like, and I've used tools like this. I'm trying to remember. I won't say the vendor name. There's like SaaS tools that like sales teams use to get like real time coaching, and they weren't that good a couple of years ago. I'll be honest, but I
Yeah,
wonder now with generative. I bet they're so much better now
I can
with generative
guarantee
AI.
this to you, Trevor. While we are talking, there is a startup that's starting in the Silicon Valley, which is solving one niche problem of like how you can like maybe teleprompt the best next thing to say when they see like reduced customer audience engagement on your feed.
So you know what I want to talk a little bit about is you mentioned that you work with financial services domain customers. I'm interested. I have some thoughts to share on this for sure. Interested what you're seeing in terms of their like maybe instances of apprehension around the technology, or maybe like lines that customers aren't ready to cross yet, or even examples of customers that are like, or not specific customers, but examples of like people that are willing to kind of to challenge and push the edge. Kind of curious what you're saying. I see a mix, but financial services is such an interesting space because it's one of the most regulated industries in in this country and the world. So curious what you've been seeing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point, right? From a customer's point of from when I say a customer, right, my customers are within the financial services domain. So
Yep.
from their point of view, a lot of times the way in which they engage with their end customers on chat is a big part of like their companies or their brand's identity. There are a lot of customers who are very cautious about like using generative AI bots for like decision making around certain things, like for example, approving someone for a loan. I'm just taking an example right
Yeah.
now, or approving someone or for, let's say, a particular credit limit. Now there are laws around what you can and what you can't do, and what is the proper process that you need to follow in order to make a decision whether someone is approved of certain credit or not, to make sure that there's no bias. So a
Yeah.
lot of times customers are not ready to use generative AI bots to be the decision maker in terms of like approving something. But a lot of
I certainly
customers,
wouldn't want that, because I've seen generative AI hallucinate. It does happen, and I would not
right,
want my credit application to be approved or denied by generative AI based on what I've seen. Not yet.
which makes
Maybe in a few
sense.
years.
Which makes sense, but we need to think about it from a different point of view, right? Like when you're trying to approve someone's credit, right? There's so many data points that you need to pull on that particular
Right.
person to make that decision.
Yeah, there's
Now,
like there's like a whole back
exactly.
end, right? It's like people think of like, oh, credit approval. It's just like a score, and then that's it. But there's like so many things that an institution actually can. Like, yes, you can use like standard FICO scores, but you can also do things like scan documents that are like a bank document or a statement or credit card statements and things like that, right? So there's so much on the back end that can help feed into the like maybe a more mathematical decision or a human decision, right?
Right. A lot of times people think it's a very single shot or a very Boolean decision that, oh, you just make an API call and see how much they qualify for. That's not usually the case. A lot of times the person who is taking the decision to like approve certain things or not is wanting to look at a lot of data. So we need to think about, a lot of my customers are okay with like using generative AI based solutions for helping them improve the developer or the productivity of their worker from that point of view,
Yeah.
right? So that they can get that information faster, and still the buck stops at the human to make the decision based on what information they've now got and what decision they need to make in for their end customer, right? So these were, I would say, the most obvious examples of what customers are okay doing and what they are not. That's what I have seen so far.
Yeah, that's what I think too, and I would say like I it's an area that I was like early on. It's like it felt like okay, we have these powerful systems that we know can do a lot in like the world of finance, for example, and can add a lot of value. But I felt a lot of anxiety like about applying them to these problems. One thing that helped me like think through this and have a kind of a framework for it, it was recently. I want to say maybe even just a couple of weeks ago, Anthropic updated their usage policy, and they just kind of draw out very clearly like what in their opinion is the line where you might think about drawing in, and I'll read it. It says for them their requirements are anytime there's integration related to a financial decision, investment advice, loan approvals, or determining financial eligibility or credit worthiness. They're not saying you should not do that. They're saying that you just need to have a human in the loop if you're delegating that decision, which I like when companies take stances like that, because it helps me in the field figure out how to advise customers, because like I wasn't quite sure like what the line was before, if that makes sense. And I'm probably never going to be an expert in loan approval regulation in reality,
Right. And I mean, the regulation also, it needs to catch up with the all the advances that are happening right now. But
Yeah.
I feel it's also very refreshing to see that a company taking a stance like that, so that there's a little bit more clarity on what use cases you would use, a certain set of models, and obviously there are going to be customers always who are pushing the envelope and like trying or challenging themselves. But I do believe that certain use cases, at least for now, the customers are not not willing to directly have the decision made by a LLM
Yeah.
model, and in some cases that's not the case.
Yep. Totally. I think the impact of the decision is really an important thing to think about. Is it like somebody's life? Is it somebody's livelihood, or is it just like, a minor like one-off thing, a product recommendation or something? Okay, so I want to play a game. Okay, I think this game just popped in my head. I'm gonna ask you to I'm gonna ask you the same question, and I'm gonna ask you to kind of answer it from two different perspectives. Actually, no. Let me step that back. I'm gonna ask you to pretend like you are the CEO of a financial services company, right? Like,
Okay.
make up whatever company you want. It could be a bank, it could be insurance, it could be a fintech, whatever. You're the CEO. You have ultimate power. You get to make 3 strategic decisions on where you want to invest resources in generative AI. What would you what do you think? What are the areas that you think you would get the biggest ROI investing in?
Yeah. So honestly, I would not start talking specifically about generative AI, because you need to realize there are a lot of things that you need to have in order before you can make a meaningful solution, which is powered by generative AI, right? So the number one, you said 3 strategic initiatives. Let me say that.
Yeah.
So my first strategic initiative is going to be towards a complete modernization of my data strategy. A lot of companies do not have a clear data strategy, or also do not have clean data strategy. They have data strategy, they have ETL pipelines, they have some kind of a archival or data warehousing solution, but it is not all designed from a perspective that all the newer require or newer consumption patterns of data. This involves like generative AI models like needing access to vector data stores, etc.
Yep.
That their data strategy today is not well flushed out for accommodating all of these newer use cases. So my
Yeah,
number one
totally.
investment, and probably the biggest investment, is most likely going to be in a data strategy. The second investment that I would want to make is going to be around security. Generative AI security is going to be absolutely important. There are a lot of instances we have seen on the web where a generative AI model has hallucinated in a public facing domain. There are a lot of social engineering and prompt injection attacks that people make on generative AI or LLM powered bots on external facing websites. So security is absolutely on the next place I would invest, and the third place would actually be in training and upskilling my employees, because this field, between I and Trevor, me and you talking right now, this field is evolving by the minute. You can see new models, new LLM models with more context windows, or even much more ability to customize, with better guardrails, etc., getting launched every week, every month. We've seen a drastic increase in the computation power by the hardware providers, so that the LLM models can be trained better or faster, etc., right? With more amount of data. I feel if a company today is not investing in their resources and upskilling them on how do we understand what is this new domain, how do we upskill, if a company is not doing that, I think ultimately it's going to be a loss for the employees, but most likely in this case it's going to be a loss for my company. So
Yeah. I
data
love
security and upskilling, that's
I
it.
love those 3 areas because it's like like, yeah, I mean, so I actually, one thing I did today, just a few hours ago, is I ran my first fine tuning job on a model, and there is this whole process of like needing data in this very specific like prompt answer format, or like these, like there's these very specific formats that you have to be able to get. And so of course having your data foundation for a use case like that, or getting it ready for like a RAG application with a vector database, make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Security, it's like, yeah, I mean, like I think if you don't invest in security, you if I was a CEO, I'd be paranoid, right? Because this is new technology, and you're putting in reality, companies that are innovating in this space are putting their most sensitive data into these systems right now, and so I think just ensuring you have that attack surface and like exfiltration surface really locked down is key. But your third one, training upskilling, like that's so huge because you're the CEO. You're not going to have all the best ideas. You really need to create an environment where employees can be creative, right? And like where it's kind of like the early days of cloud, where you want a college student in a dorm room to be able to build a massive scale web application. Is to say you want an individual contributor in an analytics team to create a solution to be able to create a generative AI solution that will scale within your company or within their team. And I think the customers that are doing this really well actually do see it's not one single use case. It's actually like a proliferation of different tasks and different pieces of like thrashing and heavy lifting and employee experience that can be improved in these incremental steps for now. I think we will see these big step changes over time as companies come up to fill out all these important gaps that organizations maybe don't want to build themselves. I love the answer of training. Like I think I agree. I think that's what I would have to invest in. I might put training and upskilling as number one. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, now that the way you spoke about it, I think that makes a lot of sense. But here's a deal, right? Like you need to think about it from this point of view. A lot of times you use the right word, right? You need to create an environment where you are giving people the opportunity to think. And unless you train them, they don't know. A lot of people don't even know the right. It's an explosion of like new terms. There is a RAG, there is prompt
Yeah.
engineering, there is prompt like what is it called? Prompt decomposition.
Yeah. I just
Then
learned
there is
about that
prompt
one last week.
evaluation. There is model evaluation. Then there is React framework. I mean, the amount of things that you need to know nowadays to have a generative AI conversation, which is at a different at a implementation level, the amount of prerequisites you need to know is very high. So unless you train people, they are not going to be able to even imagine what can be done with generative AI.
Yep.
And you're going to only have certain small set of people in your organization who are going to think. But guess what? They might be away from reality. They might be not the people who are working day and night with the actual data.
Yeah. Yeah.
So their imagination is going to be a little bit more, uh, you know, smaller in my
Yeah.
opinion, and not
Yeah.
that
Well, and you
large and
want
big
the
impact.
imagination that people have to be informed by the kind of gravitational force of like these models are amazing, but they cannot do everything. And there are things that there are certain like I've heard ideas where it's like, wow, that's a big idea. And maybe generative AI is one small part of that idea. Like a customer told me they want to like reinvent their entire supply chain with generative AI. I'm like, that sounds amazing. And I think you definitely can drive efficiency improvement and optimization with generative AI in your supply chain. But generative AI is not the magic button to a supply chain. That is going to be a complex solution that generative AI is probably one a relatively small piece of in the grand scheme of what you're building. So, okay, I've got you. By the way, I'm going to dig into that some of these uninformed ideas in a second. But before I do that, now I want you to be not a CEO. You've been demoted. You're now the CTO, or maybe
Oh
promoted,
my
depending on who you are. And I don't want to hear your top three priorities. Instead, I want to hear what are the top three like platform capabilities that you're thinking about, right? As CTO, you want to enable your engineering teams to move fast with stuff. So, or what are you thinking of in terms of platform capabilities that you need to
Yeah,
provide to your organization?
absolutely. So I'm going to go from a point of view that one model is not the answer for everything. So I want to make sure that we select a platform which allows a little bit more model flexibility. I want to make sure. So the first platform probably or I would say the first platform preference that I have is going to be around flexibility of the amount of models I have access to, without having to do any heavy lifting on like managing deploying the models, right? That's one part of it. The second part of it is going to be the priority for the platform is going to be around making the platform accessible much more democratically across the engineering organization. I don't want the platform to be just a property of a particular team. I want it to be want the identity access control security policies around the platform to be flexible enough that every single persona within the organization should be able to use it. And the last thing, I also want to make sure that the platform is providing me with a way in which I can incorporate fine tuning and model evaluation. Because as I said, the main reason or the highest priority for my platform is going to be ability to check or choose a model of my choice. I also want the platform to provide me the tools to evaluate if the model is the right model for my use case or not. So that would be my platform priorities.
I love that. I love that. I think that's sound. That's sound. You're hired as CTO, Viraj. You said vector database a couple times. I got a rapid fire question on vector database. Are vector databases are they a commodity? There's so many vector databases. Like, should I really be thinking about my vector database whenever I'm building a like most companies are right now, building some type of internal or external RAG based system? Like, how much do I need to think about that part of my stack?
See, I feel that it depends upon who you ask, right? For me, I've seen a lot of customers actually treat a vector database as a commodity. The only the price point difference is what they are going to be looking at in terms of like, running the vector database. It's going to be either self-managed, or it could be on a managed database, or it could be a third-party provider. It doesn't really matter. I feel though, as you get a little bit deeper into RAG, specifically retrieval augmented generation use cases, there are a lot of knobs that you can actually turn when it comes to vector databases in terms of improving the speed at which you can retrieve things from the from or improve the retrieval speed. There are a lot of knobs that you can turn in terms of like the chunking strategy that you
Yep.
use to put data in the vector database. So while it comes across that a lot of times vector databases are likely becoming a commodity, I don't think that myself.
Hmm.
Once you go much more deeper, like a 400 500 level deep dive into specific use cases, now one could argue that if a company has made a choice of a vector data store, then maybe most likely they're going to use the same for every single generative AI use case, you could say that. But there are reasons why you would use a serverless vector data base offering or data store offering versus a managed or provisioned data store offering. It could be cost, it could be management overhead, etc. So I don't know whether I would call that a managed like a completely commoditized thing, part of my stack, because there are a lot of knobs that you can turn
Yeah.
and a lot of options you have.
It's funny. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, but really, I guess an easier question would be like, are databases commoditized? And like, that depends on your perspective too. If you're
Yeah.
if you're a if you're a CTO, you might think so, but if you're a DBA, you probably have really strong opinions
Yeah,
about the
absolutely.
database that you need to do your job well. And I think like what I'm starting to see is like there's like some customers that really just need the cheapest, quickest option to load docs into, just to do some very basic RAG use cases. And there are great like builder and SaaS type solutions for that available all over the place. But when you start getting into like building complex applications where you need things like tenancy, or you need data isolation, or you need to tweak based on your organization's data how data sit in and out of the vector database. I can see how you start to form strong opinions about your vector
Yeah.
database of choice.
Yeah, that too. I've seen a lot of customers take a very interesting approach, and I have my own school of thought about benchmarking. A lot of customers will look at like a published benchmark and say, "Hey, database A is better than database B
Right.
because it performs really well on this benchmark." Guess what? A benchmark is not specific to your workload. It's not specific to your chunk size. It's not specific to the embedding model that you use to convert your data into tokens and store them into a vector database. So I think we need to look at the performance of the vector database as a much more zoomed out, and what does it impact on the overall experience or the overall performance of an application versus having a much more commoditized view in terms of like, this is cheap so let's use that, or this is the best in terms of performance benchmark so let's use that. I've seen customers do that, and I've seen that a lot of customers who are getting into much more complex or much more detailed oriented design when it comes to, especially when it comes to retrieval augmented generation solutions, they do not think about vector databases in that way.
All right. So I got just a couple more questions I'm going to hit you with. And the first one, we're gonna go away from the B2B and into the world of like B2C. I want to know, Viraj, like what do you use if you need to use AI in your life? Like, is there a model that you like to use for a personal assistant right now? Like, what are you gravitating towards?
Um, so I like to use like Amazon Bedrock as a platform, like a place to interact with models, because it satisfies my first priority, which is essentially having the optionality of models.
Yeah.
From the model point of view, I've used, let's, in model, there are two variations, the embeddings model and then the LLM.
Yep.
So I think from the embeddings model, I've used both Amazon Titan, I've used Cohere's embeddings model. They've both given me similar experience in terms of like performance. From a, let's say, from a LLM point of view, most of my experience has been around like Anthropic's Claude model.
Yep.
I've done Haiku, I've done Sonnet. I've not obviously done the Sonnet 3.5, which
Not
is
yet.
the
No. Soon.
not yet. It's
just
a new
just
announcement.
came out today as we're recording this. Yeah.
Yeah. And then yeah, that's my current stack. I like to program everything. Like I like to deploy everything using CDK. So
Yeah.
infrastructure as code. So I use CDK for deploying everything. It makes it easy to like spin up and tear down. For vector databases, I've mostly used OpenSearch serverless because I don't have to provision cluster sizes, etc. There are obviously
Yeah.
other vector database choices, but this is what I have used for experimenting on my
Yeah.
side. And then one more thing, and maybe I don't want to like diverge the complete conversation, but I want to like bring this to people's attention. The biggest and the best and the fastest model may not necessarily be what you need. And I'm just gonna say that line and park it there. And Trevor, you can add more color to this because I have very strong opinions on this,
No, okay.
especially
So,
now.
if you've got strong opinions, I want to hear them. I don't want to taint your opinions with mine. I'll share mine at the end, but my
Yeah.
opinion is still being formed. So, what do you
So
think?
this is what I've seen, right? When you have a model which has a large like context window, when you have a model which is the newest and the flashiest and the biggest in terms of like context window, etc. Sometimes what happens is the price for using the model is high, right?
Yeah.
I've realized there are a lot of strategies you can do. Prompt decomposition, you can actually segment the data that you are querying from, especially in terms of RAG use cases, where you could get off and get the same amount of like same if not better quality using like a cheaper and smaller model. And I've actually seen a lot of customers like experiment with the biggest model first, and then as they realize that, oh, maybe we don't need access to all of this data to generate this. We need only access to certain subsections, which means now we can get off with a smaller context window,
Yeah.
right? They use a smaller model, and uh, they get the result that they want without having to pay that much price. So I've seen a lot of customers who are very the knee jerk reactions are like, oh, the new model came up, let's just use that. There's
Yeah.
a lot of really interesting it's almost like call it like LLM uh, adoption maturity, where you realize that you don't need to have like the the context window model, but you could be smart about. There are a lot of other techniques, right? A lot of advanced prompt engineering techniques that you can use to actually make sure that you can use the smallest and cheapest model. And that brings me back to model evaluation, prompt evaluation, right? You have to evaluate whether you are using a model and you're getting a quality out of it. Is it worth paying that much money for, right?
Mhm.
You have to understand and evaluate that all the time. So that's just been my experience.
Very nice. No, I like that perspective. I feel like one thing that's certainly going to happen is like right now. I recently I've gotten into a lot of conversations where it feels like we're like kind of pushing the edge of what the models are capable of today, and I think because of that, the natural instinct is to jump to like who's the flavor of the month highest benchmark model, because my use case is super complex and I need the smartest model. But I think over time, like already there are some use case like RAG. RAG is such a perfect example where it's like you actually many times don't need intelligence at all. The only real function that the model serves in a lot of RAG use cases is understanding the context and then doing the lookup in the vector database. Many good RAG implementations actually say we want no variability in the model response at all. We just want the exact text that's stored in our vector database. And in that case, it's like, okay, well, you don't need it. You just need a stupid model that can understand context and then and integrate with your RAG implementation. So
Yeah.
I think I think over time, I bet, especially as it just becomes more like the level of intelligence just becomes more of a table stakes thing. I imagine things will shift hard at some point away from the biggest, baddest, smartest model to they're basically all super smart. Like, let's just use the cheapest one that we can.
Yeah. I mean, better to say that the cheapest one is let's use the model which gives us the best like price
Price
performance.
performance, yeah.
So like you would probably need the biggest and best model for a much more complicated use case which needs like a tremendous amount of like context window, but you don't really need that all the time. And that brings me to another point, right? Like I feel a lot of times customers are also using large language models and generative AI for deterministic flows, where we know that most LLMs by the nature of it are non-deterministic. So if you have a deterministic workflow that you need to follow, you can actually build it with a non-generative AI, a technology stack, and use generative AI for the right reasons. Like I've seen and advised customers a lot around this specifically that hey, your use case deterministic. You don't need Gen AI for this. But guess what? This part of your bigger, workflow is where you need summarization. So let's use Gen AI only for that piece. I think there's definitely something that we need to say about that, because a lot of times customers are just using, it's a cool new word, so I'm going to use this for everything. You don't want to use a multi-tool for as a screwdriver when you
Yeah.
have a screwdriver, right? Like it's like that's how I look at it.
Have you, by the way, have you done any prompt decomposition? I've just read a blog about it. I haven't tried to do it yet.
Yeah, I have done a little bit of that recently, actually, this week. I've had really good results, and I was able to actually step down to a much more cheaper model
Yeah, because that
because of
helps
that.
with accuracy, right? Like the blog that I read basically said like this is like breaking it down and basically breaking down a complex prompt, which I think if you've done any prompt engineering training, you've seen how wicked complex prompts can get. But basically breaking them down into smaller subsets just it seems like increases accuracy, like and reduces variability. Is I don't know what did you see with it? Because that's what I got from the blog I read.
Yeah, I've seen definitely it reducing variability. I've also actually seen it giving me a little bit more faster responses, right? Because I'm actually
Mm.
now reducing the complexity of prompts. I also do think personally, when you do prompt decomposition, it forces you to think in much more logically
Mm.
understandable, smaller prompts. Sometimes you end up writing extremely complicated prompts, and my test for that is like give it to your peer. Can that human understand what you're trying to achieve? If not, there's a problem, right? Like think about simplifying it. It's like, why do you need prompt decomposition? I always look at it from like, you don't want to monolith your prompt,
Yeah.
right? Like you want to like actually, yeah, I don't even know if that's a term, but that's how I
No,
look
I
at it.
like it. It makes sense to me. I totally get what you're saying. Yeah, we want like like a kind of decomposed microservices type prompt. One thing I want, because I haven't tried the technique yet, I do wonder like the like how much longer it takes you to develop a prompt. Like in that, like, do you think once you get used to it, like you're still operating at the same velocity, or do you think it does slow you? I mean, the benefit might be worth it, even if it slows down your development velocity. But when I looked at the code samples, I'm not a great developer, so when I looked at the code samples, all I could think is great. Oh, I have to write more code.
That's going to be a little hard to say for now, in my opinion. I mean, I've only done it with one example where I took like a
Yeah.
bigger prompt and decomposed it into smaller prompts. I
Yeah,
feel
it's like
more
you
about,
have to do it a few times and get used to it before you
yeah,
figure out a flow. And I'm sure eventually, if we learn that this is actually a really great technique to optimize these models, because I've just started to hear about it in the last couple of months. If we really see this gain adoption, I'm sure there will be some framework or plugin that like
yeah.
basically automatically does the decomposition for you in an even more intelligent way than we probably even could. Just kind of guessing what to break down.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be more of a way to interact with LLM models rather than like you start with a bigger prompt and decompose it, right? Like once you have the mental model for you how you should break prompts into smaller pieces. I think a lot of customers or a lot of people would actually try to use prompt decomposition from like the get go, right?
Yeah.
So at that point, it's not like the effort that you take
No,
afterwards.
in fact, as soon as I read the blog that I read, I reached out to a friend and I was like, "Hey, when should I talk about prompt decomposition with my customers?" And that was their answer. They said you should do it early because then their evaluations are likely to be more successful, just based on the results that he's
100%.
seeing.
I can tell you that the accuracy bump was like significant when I actually saw it. And by the way, are you mentioning the prompt decomposition blog by Justin Mueller?
Yeah, that's the one I found, the one by
Okay.
Justin. And he
Yeah,
had
it's
since I
like
work with him,
amazing.
I could just Slack him and say like,
Yeah.
"Hey, dude, like when should I talk about?" Yeah, but that's a great blog. Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually took that and I used it for a separate use case because I wanted to like I ran because he has put his code get in GitHub.
Totally.
It's open sourced it, but it is interesting to see what happens when you start like going beyond that example and start actually testing it with your I won't say I didn't use my customer data for it,
Yeah,
obviously,
right.
but I used like
Some
I
mock
have a
data.
made up prompt. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Cool, cool. All right. I get last question for you, and then cause I think it's almost 5 p.m. your time, right? So I'll let you go. Enjoy your evening, whatever type of traffic there is over there in your part of the world. The last question is, man, like, let's close out on some inspiration. Like, what do you think? Like, what is next? Like, we don't know. We can just guess. But like, what do you think is going to? What do you think is around the corner? Maybe is what I want to ask. Like, what do you think is the next major sort of shift in this space that's going to have a big impact on customers and people adopting this technology?
I think a lot of use cases which people are just been talking or tinkering around are going to see the light of production. So let me give you a very interesting use case, right? A lot of use cases which we have already been seeing around like marketing development and photos development, video development, audio development, etc. I think those are good, they're relevant, and they are important. But I think generative AI is going to be soon more and more and more widely adopted within like enterprise environment
Yeah.
because of the ways in which tools, guardrails, platforms, model optionality, prompt engineering, prompt evaluation, model evaluation, etc. These things what are getting built right now, right? All the articles around it, all the frameworks around it is a very good indicator that now serious use cases. And when I say serious use cases, I don't mean that image and text generation are not serious use cases. They are too
Yeah.
in certain industries. But I feel like mainstream use case adoption, I can see a lot of mainstream use case adoption for sure.
Cool. Cool. I'm excited for that. I'm excited. I think we're still early. Like, just seeing what organizations go through when they start building and trying to launch these things. I do think, like, kind of back to something you said earlier on the importance of training and enablement, is like, I think a lot of people are like learning the hard way, and I think that leads to a pretty, that can sometimes lead to a slow cycle of getting things to production because you're still figuring out all the cuts and bruises and things you have to work around to make the technology do what you need to tame this powerful technology. And I think as people experiment more and as more tools are available that make it easy to not have all these kind of self-inflicted issues when you're trying to launch an app, I think you're spot on, dude.
I
Thanks
think
for
one
yeah.
more thing, right? I also feel that, the rise of multimodal models, right? Like, I feel that is a very big, so for people who don't know, multimodal models are basically which allow you to like process or text, video, like more than just text data, right? Or images. And I feel like that should give us a good indicator of where the industry is going in terms of adopting these models. Think about it from an example that you had a huge TED talk that you wanted to listen to, but you didn't have time, right? And you were driving and you wanted an audio version of the TED talk, but in a summarized form, which only spoke about highlights. Think about it from that point of view, right? Now you can use a multimodal model to essentially process and summarize for you only the highlights or the most watched sections of the video, because that's how they'll get the highlights, and summarize it for you, and maybe even tell you the narrate it to you while you're driving, maybe in a completely different language.
Yeah.
You never know, like the amount of implications in terms of like the rate at which content is going to be more hyper personalized to you is going to be crazy, is what I think.
Yeah, yeah. I'm excited and sometimes scared, but maybe that's just because I've been watching too much Black Mirror. And there's literally an episode about this where like somebody like is watching Netflix and like Netflix is like making a show about their life falling apart in real time with AI or
Oh my
something. But yeah, or
god.
maybe. But anyway, no, I'm with. I think like yeah, it also has huge implications for the amount of training data that's generated, which creates this kind of exponential ability for us. Because right now it's like all text-based training data, but if we also have, or mostly I should say, but we're going to have exposure to more data via audio feeds and video feeds, that means
Yeah.
like more
The other thing
training.
also, what I can think about now, I mean, I'm just like blowing up with ideas right now, but what I can think is like, everyone's way to learn content is different, right? Like, for example, like, some people are better when visual learners, and some
Yep.
like to solve equations, right? I feel with all the advances that we are seeing, I could also see an ability for people to learn the same content but in their own way.
Dude.
Does that make sense? Like, especially
It's
this is
totally
very
resonating
relevant
with
in
me, man.
mathematics. It's very, very relevant in mathematics, especially.
Even outside of even like for me, like I'll be honest, like I struggle. Like if the barrier to entry for me to learn something is reading something that's more than 20 pages, I'm not going to do it.
No way. Right. Exactly.
And some people like that. Some people will sit down and they like reading to learn. I really learn from watching and doing. And so I think whether it's like creating, like converting text into like a video format or audio format that I can watch on the go, or even creating like a simulation type thing to help you learn something in real time. I think that's going to be.
But what would be cooler is basically you go into a learning platform and you fill a certain set of questions and they categorize you as like the audio learner or a visual learner or like a reader, etc. And then you can look at any course that you want to, but you get it delivered in the way that is more receptive to you. I think that now we're talking, right? We can talk about this all evening.
Now we're talking. Now we are talking. We could talk about all evening. It's hard not to talk about this stuff. I tell you what, Viraj, thank you for the conversation. The thing I like most is like I'm actually leaving. There are some things that that were fuzzy to me before this that are less fuzzy to me now, and really the top 3 things that you would do if you were the CEO, that really struck a chord with me. Like I think I might repeat that to customers I work with of like, these are the 3 things you need to focus on because it is so true. Thanks for making the time, man. It was a blast, and hopefully we can have you on again sometime.
Absolutely. This was amazing. Thanks for the opportunity, Trevor.
Awesome. See you later, Viraj.
Thank you. Bye.